Hi, this is Tammy Elser, and I'm going to provide a brief introduction right now on some key aspects of assessment that I would like participants in this course to contemplate as we begin an exploration of how to effectively assess writing and support young writers in the development of their proficiency. Critical to our discussion is going to be an exploration of how assessment can be used to promote learning. That is, assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. Obviously, it is important for us as teachers to assess the learning that's gone on, but that's something that actually happens at the end of the learning cycle, not something that actually drives the learning cycle. When we talk about assessment of writing, we're talking about providing opportunities for learners to hone and refine their skills. As we begin, let's take a look at some fast facts about assessment. The first thing that we all need to understand is the degree to which assessment itself drives instruction, but that is not the intent. It's actually an effect. It's the tail wagging the dog. Assessment drives instruction because however we assess, we come to match our instruction to support whatever that assessment might be. We'll talk more about this as we go through the course. Assessment also impacts classroom climate. It changes and potentially transforms in negative ways the very relationships that we have with our students. AKA, students might assume that grading is a form of punishment, a form of judgment, a form of evaluation, but see virtually no impact of the grading on their ability to go back and transform and rethink and refine, hone, and actually grow their learning as the process continues. Assessment can promote or actually thwart growth mindsets. It can reinforce an idea in students that they're simply bad at something, that it's an innate quality of them, and that basically their ability is fixed, or it can promote growth. The idea that I tried, I'm going to try again, and if I try a little harder, if I think a little deeper, if I do something differently as a consequence of rich feedback that's been provided to me, I can accomplish my instructional goals. It can focus or it can actually distract the learner. An example, assessments where a child actually ends up memorizing a set of criteria, for example, memorizing points on a rubric, or focusing on the rote memorization of some aspect of the assessment itself, actually ends up distracting the child from whatever that performance may actually be. So some very simple examples. A child who is assessed periodically in reading proficiency, for example, and is assessed solely on the speed of their reading, might come to perceive that reading quickly is what reading is about, and as a consequence lose their focus on comprehension. Assessment can support or it can thwart the intended learning. Let's take a few minutes to review some of the impacts of positive versus negative assessment strategies. I've designed this so that we look at this in a comparative way. Positive assessment strategies encourage students to embrace risk, and negative assessment strategies will cause students to become risk avoidant. Positive assessment strategies promote collaboration and cooperation within the classroom. Negative assessment strategies promote competition. Positive assessment strategies support a community of learners. Negative assessment strategies isolate individuals. Those individuals in isolation will either consider themselves superior to or inferior to each other based on the kinds of assessment that's been imposed upon them. Positive assessment strategies promote a growth mindset, the whole concept of not yet, meaning that the learner is deeply engaged in making ongoing improvements to their learning, to their understanding, and ultimately to their performance. Negative assessment strategies promote a fixed mindset, which is basically, I can't do that. I'm innately incapable of doing something. Positive assessment strategies continually engage students in practice and actually motivate them toward that practice. Negative assessment strategies can cause students to either become passive or even active avoiders. Students engaged in active avoidance actually can become behavior and disciplinary problems in your classroom. Positive assessment strategies support joy and play. There's a sense of excitement and adventure when students are engaged in that act. Negative assessment strategies promote fear, which can actually cause students to become frozen. Positive assessment strategies support cycles of drafts, with each draft becoming remarkably better than the draft before it, and students engaged in the process of honing and crafting in a very risk-free environment. Negative assessment strategies support one and done. When the student turns in that paper, they wait for your judgment, particularly the grade on the paper versus the feedback, and that judgment stands. As a consequence, they have no motivation to go back and make any modification to the original drafts. Positive assessment strategies promote an I'll help you attitude on the part of the teacher and also other learners within the classroom. Negative assessment strategies are kind of like a game of gotcha, where the student recognizes that they're going to make errors that they're not aware of at all, errors for which they've had no prior learning, if you will, and they are aware that either the teacher or even their peers are going to catch them in the act of making an error. Positive assessment strategies encourage students to view their errors as approximations, and negative assessment strategies encourage them to view their errors as demerits or a point deleted from the paper, from the ongoing grading process. Positive assessment strategies keep students focused on the writing and the quality of the writing and keep students engaged in writing. Negative assessment strategies focus on testing, assessment, and fundamentally grading, judgment, and evaluation. I'd like you to think about your strategies as falling into one of these 5 categories. And I want you to think about assessment in terms of the kind of relationship that you hope it's going to build between you and the learner within the context of the classroom. I'm constantly trying to focus my own assessments on feedback, interaction, and the building of the relationship. As a result, I'm really working hard on myself to become more descriptive and far more specific in the type of feedback that I provide for an individual learner. That feedback, when it is descriptive, actually supports a student in being able to hone and refine and craft a piece over time. If I can create an interactive dialogue with the student about their work, all the better. And as a consequence of that interactive dialogue, I hope that I'm going to be able to build the kind of relationship that allows the student to know that I trust them, that I value them and their work, that our work environment together is going to be risk-free, and that I'm focused on helping them, supporting their intrinsic motivation, and that I ultimately will release responsibility to them for their own learning. That's when that classroom itself becomes self-winding as a consequence of the kind of assessment strategies that are being imposed. So my focus is constantly on feedback, interaction, and relationship, and I am trying constantly to diminish the power and the negative influence of judgment and evaluation. So, 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood. I'm looking at the lens of informal assessment as being the road less traveled, and formal assessment as being what we often think of as assessment. This includes the SBAC test. It includes our focus on large standardized assessments. It also includes an extended focus on the development of very elaborate rubrics and assessment schemes and strategies. I want you to think of the informal, and you can all clearly read the slide and get the sense of where I'm going with this, but I'd like you to think as the informal as the nudge. It's providing just enough feedback to nudge a learner forward in their understanding. And I want you to know that when I do informal assessment in the classroom with students, I'm frequently just reading over their shoulder as they're drafting something. And sometimes my nudge is as simple as placing my finger where I see a specific error in their text or something that I believe they know how to fix, drawing their attention to it, making eye contact with the student and seeing whether they understand or fail to understand. If they fail to understand, I have the teachable moment. If they understand, very frequently they correct whatever that error might be immediately, or they modify that word choice, or they look at a variation in the sentence, etc. You get the idea. But the informal nudge is an incredibly powerful and very often overlooked opportunity, and we have far too much focus on the formal.